The way to do it is to have an empowered, well-educated community to realise that the system that enslaves us is simply fiction, it's just paper-based, and to take it upon ourselves to implement a new version of reality. And I believe we can do this, folks, and I believe that the more negative the powers that be make it, the more opportunity we are being presented with as a species to take the matter in hand ourselves and to step away from the tyrannical system that currently enslaves us. And I think it's really important that we take the matter in hand, folks. I mean, some of the stuff that they're doing, it's just beyond belief. There was a recent report by the Atlantic magazine that explains how engineering the human body could combat climate change. And the report is referencing a paper put out by Matthew Liao, who is a professor of philosophy and bioethics at New York University. And one really must question how much ethics this man actually has, or whether the term bioethics has anything to do with actual ethics, because what he's suggesting in the paper is that we could genetically engineer smaller babies that have a smaller carbon footprint. He suggests that the population could be drugged in order to be happy and like their surroundings. We could also have a kind of pharmacologically induced meat intolerance, so that people could have a medication which would make them nauseous if they ate meat, so therefore it would reduce the need for meat. I mean, it is really something that is beyond Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Of course, it's saying we would not advocate certain things, but of course they would make it possible for the government to carry these things out anyway. It talks about using antidepressants to induce new beliefs with people. You know, if you have a very pessimistic view of the world, then you could take a drug that would cause you to develop a more positive outlook. I mean, all sorts of stuff, folks, and as I said, genetically engineering human beings to be of a certain type, and perhaps giving families the option between 2 medium-sized children or 3 small-sized children. The family might wish to have a really good basketball player as a child, and so they could use human engineering to just have one really large child, rather than, say, 2 or 3 smaller ones. I mean, this is where they wish to take the human race, folks. It's absolutely frightening. It's also suggesting that perhaps eyes like cats would be better, because that way we would not need to burn as much fuel for light, because we would have far better vision at night. I mean, it really is, as I said, folks, beyond Aldous Huxley, and it's a paper that really you have to read to believe. It kind of defies analysis, folks, that anyone can actually dream this stuff up. And it really does demonstrate the wonders of a left brain education and an extremely boxed view of reality. And what this paper is talking about, folks, is eugenics and transhumanism. You see, eugenics and transhumanism are 2 of the things that seem to slip by under the carpet when most people just aren't looking. There's a lot of repressive pieces of legislation that are being brought in all around the place. There's the threat of the war with Iran. There's Coney. There's all sorts of things going on to distract people. And people aren't noticing what's happening in their own backyards. But when you really look at the eugenics agenda, look at Agenda 21, look at transhumanism, and you see how all of this ties in with everything else. It all ties in with Codex Alimentarius. It all ties in with the fracking that's going on all throughout the country, all throughout the world, which is actually resulting in the destruction of the global water table. See, this is all about driving people into large population centres, getting people out of the country, getting people in areas where they can more easily be contained and subject to genetic and environmental manipulation. And this is where the smart meters come into it as well, the satellite grid, the mobile phone technology. It all ties together, folks. And the legislation and all this sort of stuff that's being brought in is very bad. Absolutely, it's bad. But you've got to see how this ties in on the global stage as well, because even with the health bill that's been brought in Western Australia, You can see how this relates to fracking, how this relates to eugenics, how it relates to transhumanism, how it relates to Codex Alimentarius. Because it's all about control, folks. It's all about locking down the entire human consciousness. And it's also about putting guards on all the legal exits that people may have available to them. And with the introduction of things such as this Western Australian Health Bill, you can also declare people who wish to stand up against the system as being insane. You can lock them up, you can give them shock therapy. I mean, all of these bills look quite harmless on the surface. You look at them and they say, well, this only applies to certain disabled children and blah, blah, blah. But you have to look a little bit deeper and see how these bills can be used and manipulated a little bit down the track. And that's the way they always do it, folks. It's always quite benign on the surface. But when you start getting into it and looking at the fine print and looking at the possibilities for abuse, then the true picture begins to unfold. And you see, it's always done in gradual increments, folks. They never do anything too out in the open in case people notice what's going on. I mean, they'll do things that are pretty blatant, but it's never so in your face that it will cause a rebellion. It's got to be done by the Fabian method of gradualism, and this is very much what they do. And this is why the agenda never changes with successive governments. As I've often said before, the governments may have little differences in as far as a healthcare bill or their stance on gay marriages or something which is completely irrelevant to reality. But the overall agenda never really changes. You know, when you look at the similarities now between the Gillard government and John Howard's government, John Howard, of course, was the Prime Minister that we had here for 10 years, the man who oversaw the Port Arthur massacre, the man who signed off all the deals for coal seam gas mining, and the man who got us involved in the illegal wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Of course, while the Howard regime was in power in this country, you saw the opposition standing out against all of these things, and yet when the opposition came to power, all they did was escalate these things, when, as I said, they were standing against them in all of their rhetoric before the election. That is, of course, against everything except for the gun control that was brought in via the Port Arthur massacre. Every politician in Australia stood for that because it very much served their interests to put some extremely excessive measures in place to prevent people from ever being able to obtain firearms. I mean, you still can get guns here, folks, if you belong to a shooters club or something. You just have to jump through several hoops to do it, and you're not able to have anything that may be semi-automatic or anything like that. Nothing that you could use to protect yourself against anyone with a military-grade weapon, like perhaps the police force or the army, were they to be deployed on the streets in this country. You can go out there with a single-shot rifle and you can do target shooting, or you can perhaps go pig shooting or something, but there are no semi-automatic weapons allowed in this country. And this, of course, is as a result of the Port Arthur massacre. Very notably, and as I've said before, the Port Arthur massacre was staged just 1 year after the Howard government signed off on all of the mining deals that would allow practices such as coal seam gas mining to be carried out in this country. So when you're looking at global events, folks, something that you really need to do is step back and put all of these events together on a global stage and realize that all the world is indeed a stage. And if something happens which is causing a major social effect, then it's been staged for a reason. The whole Kony video that's just come out recently is a very, very clear indication of this, folks. Kony, the most viral video in history, received something like 75 million views in a matter of 6 days. And as a result of the Kony video, the United States are now saying that they can put troops anywhere in Africa if it is to protect civilians. So what they've done is they've basically garnered public approval for an illegal invasion into any country in Africa, as long as they can show the people that they're going in there to protect civilians. And folks, really all you need to do to sell that story to the people is to get 20 or 30 civilians in front of a camera and have them perform in the manner you would like them to perform, maybe have them dance around a statue, get a couple of people, wrap them up in rags and make them look injured, and bang, you've suddenly created an entire false news story and you've used it to sway public opinion in favour of yet another illegal invasion. I mean, the people in Iraq dancing around the statue of Saddam Hussein was a classic example of this, folks, when the statue was pulled over and there were all the people standing around dancing. I mean, there was actually only those people that were seen on camera there. They were the only ones who were celebrating. And it was just a photo op, the whole thing. I mean, look at the news reports that came in during the first Gulf War that were actually filmed in the studio in the United States. The people weren't anywhere near Iraq or Kuwait, and yet there they were acting and hamming it up like they were. So most of these news stories can very, very easily be concocted, and that's all it will now take for the US to stage any invasion into Africa. All they have to do is garner public opinion and get the help of people such as Angelina Jolie to promote it to the people. Angelina Jolie was, of course, highly instrumental in supporting the Libyan invasion, and she's now supporting the invasion into Syria, and, of course, all being done under the guise of humanitarianism, when in fact Angelina Jolie is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and she has anything but humanitarian motives for anything that she does. But I think it's break time here, folks, so I'll leave it there for now, and we'll go and have a break. Thank you for spending this time with me today, and I'll talk to you again in a few minutes.